Howdy, this is Matt the Electrician, and you're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Matt the Electrician, man, thank you so much for joining Time to Connect.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying your music very much and wanting to get you on here for a while. I'm glad we could get the schedules coordinated, and I appreciate it. Are you in Austin?
I am, yeah.
And I know you live in Austin. How long have you been there?
This year it'll be 28 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 96 you moved there?
Moved here in May of 96, yeah.
Uh-huh. That's fascinating. I moved away from there in May of 96.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I just missed you. Um, So let's see. I want to obviously want to talk about your music and see what's on the horizon for you, and talk about the new record that is about to come out. In fact, it'll be released the day after this video is released, so good timing there.
Nice.
And then I've just got some general questions for you, just to kind of get to know you a little bit. But let's start with a little biographical discussion. Tell me. Where you grew up, what you were like as a kid, how you got into music, whatever strikes you there as sort of a potted biography.
um, I grew up in Ashland, Oregon, um, and a little town north of there called Talent, Oregon, for the first eight or 9 years of my life. I was born in San Francisco, but my folks moved up there with a bunch of other hippies in the late '60s, early '70s, and at a certain point, we moved back down to California for my dad's work, and then we moved again, and then we moved again, and so we moved around a lot when I was a kid. Um, but in terms of music, there was my parents were both just big music fans, and my dad played guitar. He played electric rhythm guitar in like a '60s rock cover band when I was really little,
Nice.
and it neither of them were professional musicians ever, but there were just instruments around the house a lot when I was a kid, and there was a very just kind of open vibe about learning to play instruments and to play music. I think versus a lot of the people that I met later in life, going to college and studying music, um, there were not a lot of lessons in in
Hmm.
my childhood. There were not a lot of music lessons,
Hmm.
um, which isn't to say that my parents were open to it. If we asked about something, they would offer lessons sometimes, or to hire someone. Um, but largely we were just encouraged to kind of pick up instruments and play them if we wanted to. And all of this in the context of, especially when I was really little, we did not have any money. There were some periods of food stamps and the like, and yet, like, we had a piano. I remember we got a piano when I was like 3 or 4, and it was old and just kind of a beater. But they would kind of pick up stuff like that. They got me a trumpet. I really wanted to play the trumpet, and when I was 5 years old, they found me a garage sale trumpet for, like, I think it was less than $5,
Wow.
and brought that home. My mom got my dad a drum set for his birthday, I think, one year, that again was a garage sale find, so it was very cheap, and it just lived in our living room for at least 4 or 5 years. It was kind of the centerpiece of the living room, and nobody in my family ever really played drums, or at least not at any professional level. But it was just there, and so we could play it whenever we wanted.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the general vibe of the house and music when I was a kid.
And your first instrument that you played with any seriousness was a trumpet, is that right?
Yeah.
How long did you play trumpet?
I mean, I still play.
Okay.
I went to college for as a trumpet major, um, and and did and kind of was pretty serious about it, I guess. I mean, I was never great at practicing, uh, so my trumpet teacher in college, my advisor, I don't think he liked me very much. I don't think he. Well, at least I should say he maybe he liked me. I don't think he respected my my practicing regimen, which in retrospect, I didn't either.
Hmm.
But I loved playing in the jazz groups, and I really loved playing, what was referred to as legit music,
Hmm.
and chamber music in particular. But I dropped out of college to join a world beat band, as a Zimbabwean influenced world beat band, that, with the promise of touring Africa and all of this other stuff, that none of it ever came to pass. We just kind of went up and down the West Coast for a year.
And you're playing
Um,
trumpet for them?
yeah, I was in the horn section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, there's so much there. I want you to that I could comment on, or ask you about, because I've poked around a little bit on in terms of your history. And one thing I hope you'll do. In fact, let me ask you to do it right now. Is tell the story about the kid on the hillside in the jean jacket with the guitar and all the girls sitting around him. What's behind that story?
Yeah, that was my friend Bill, who I'm still in touch with now. He's a great tattoo artist in Folsom, California. When I was a freshman in high school, freshman or sophomore, I was probably a sophomore, but I played the trumpet, and I was in the band, and and that was the only instrument I had ever played up to that point. And I remember there was this kid, Bill, who was so cool. He had really long hair, and he had this jean jacket that had patches, kind of patches all over it, and safety pin to it. And on the back, he had this piece of cloth, and on it was written a quote from Watership Down. I don't remember the quote, but it was safety pinned to the back of his jacket. And he was just so cool. And he would sit on this one hillside where a lot of the older kids sat for lunch. And he had an ovation, and he'd bring the guitar case to school every day. And I just remember one day, I mean, I knew he was there. I kind of knew him already, but I remember walking by during lunch, and I was carrying my trumpet case, and I looked up, and Bill's sitting there, and he's playing like Stairway to Heaven or Sounds of Silence, or you just play all of these songs that you play on the guitar when you're first learning. And he was just surrounded by girls. And I remember having this
Yep.
total aha moment of,
Yeah.
like, looking down at my trumpet and then looking at Bill, and I thought, I need to learn how to play the guitar.
Yeah.
And I think, if memory serves, I literally went home that day and asked my dad, "Hey, will you teach me how to play the guitar?" And he
Well,
kind of did.
and well, you're one of the things I've noticed about you. You are a terrific guitar player. How for a guy that never practiced much, and I understand you did go to school to train to be a musician, but how did you get to be such a good guitar player? Did
Well,
it come naturally? Did a lot of it come naturally to you, you think?
that, that's very nice of you to say. I mean, I live in Guitar Town, and
Right,
so
right.
I don't think of myself as a great guitar player.
It's all
And I
relative.
really and I really have just, I think at this point, it comes down to just time. You spend enough time doing anything, and I think you get comfortable with it. And you know the nice thing that it was kind of an unintended consequence of moving to Austin. I didn't really know anything about Austin when I moved here. Um, I didn't know any of the songwriting history. I didn't really know any of the musical history. But being in a place like this where you're surrounded by so many good players, and so many good players that are like casually good,
Hmm.
like it's not Nashville or LA
Hmm.
where there's these people that are, I don't know, there's more business. That
Yeah,
the thing with Austin is, it always was just, there's no business here, and so the players here just like to play, and there's people that no one has ever heard of that are the best guitar player you've ever heard.
yeah,
And I think when you're surrounded by that, you just naturally get a little bit better,
yeah.
because you have to kind of keep up. And so I always just wanted to learn things to accompany myself in terms of songwriting and singing. And I think, again, growing up in the house with the drum set, playing in some of these kind of world beat bands and reggae bands and ska bands, I think I have a natural sense of rhythm that is that's more interesting to me as a guitar player
Mhm.
than
Playing licks.
well, I mean, I appreciate the ability to do that. I've never
Sure.
been much of a lead player,
That's
but
why you play with people like Scrappy, right? Scrappy
yeah,
Judnuka.
totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Scrappy is incredible.
Yeah.
Um, but I think also to play behind people like that, you do have to get better at um, not just at playing rhythm guitar, quote unquote, but I think with coming up with interesting rhythmic things to do behind people like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How would you, this may not be a fair question. How would you describe the style of guitar that you play? I mean, do you, I don't know if you've even thought about that, but if someone asked you, what style of guitar do you play? I mean, do you play with a finger pick? Do you, just how would you talk about it, the way you play guitar?
Um, I've never used any kind of picks. I've tried at various points just to see if I could, but
Hmm.
I'm sure if I gave it more
Hmm.
attention, I like anything, I probably could. But like I said before, I'm kind of lazy
Yeah.
when it comes to practicing.
Feel
So
you.
I do whatever kind of comes naturally. But I've always just played with my fingers,
Yeah.
um, and I think everybody is an amalgam of whoever you listen to.
Sure.
And I just got home from Austin from a trip to California for the holidays. So I was like 4 days in the car with my family and just listening to shuffle with my iTunes library, and I was thinking a lot actually in the last couple of days just about influences and that sort of thing because um, it's it's not my favorite question in the world to think about like the one what's your greatest influence or that
Sure.
sort of thing.
Sure.
But that being said, I think when you start listening to kind of the catalog of your past, of all these songs and musicians that you've listened to, you can start kind of putting together a map. And and I think my three greatest influences since I started writing songs, since I started listening to music, have always been Paul Simon and Ricky Lee Jones and Taj Mahal. And I think the three of them for kind of three different reasons. I mean, Paul, definitely the lyricism,
Yeah.
Ricky kind of the composing and the vibe, and Taj like just pure vibe. It's just, I mean, I love some of his favorite songs of mine he did not write, but I do respect him and appreciate him as a songwriter. But also, there's just something about like there's there's something about the vibe that he kind of puts across and the rhythm that he puts into things that
Mhm.
anyway, all of that to be said, I feel like my guitar playing is is an amalgam of things that I've heard Paul and Taj do,
Okay.
but with a healthy dose. I spent a lot of years listening to nothing but Mark Knopfler,
Oh, okay.
and I think even though I didn't specifically decide not to play with a pick because of Mark Knopfler, but certainly after years of already playing without a pick and then finding out that he never used one, that that made it okay in my head, like,
Hmm.
and kind of listening to the dampening things that he does with his hands to kind of accentuate the fact that he's not using a pick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really, it's so interesting that you would mention those three, and I know I've heard you say that one of the reasons you moved to Austin was Poi Dog Pondering,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
man, I was glad to hear that. I was way into them. What year would that have been? Living with the Dreaming Body. God,
I
what a
think well
song!
that came out like
Yeah.
89 or 90, 88 or 89, something like that.
And yet people, I don't know if it's just the fact that you're in Austin and you're a singer-songwriter, people want to put the label folk on you, which I guess is fair, but you definitely are more, there's a more pop sensibility and something more akin to someone like Boy Dog or some of the influences you mentioned than say Guy Clark, Townes Van Zandt,
Oh
Jerry,
yeah.
those guys.
Yeah.
Why do you suppose? Are you okay with this folk label, and do you think it really does fit?
Well, I mean, labels and genres kind of shift and change every couple years anyway, and so I don't know. I think it doesn't matter until it does. In the business side of things, sometimes it does because people want to put you in a, right now Americana is big,
Yeah.
you know, and it fit, 10, 15 years ago, it was kind of laughed at. Like the name,
Hmm.
the concept of that was more of a joke. And
Hmm.
I think people like Jason Isbell and Margot Price, came up at it and kind of made that label stick to something a little more serious, I guess, which
Hmm.
again, I don't know that that's important or that it matters. But every time something like that shifts, where there was a moment where Americana meant the old 97s and Whiskey Town. Right after that was alt country, and and then Americana got kind of broader where it could
Yeah.
encompass more things, and now it seems to be shifting back to more country tinged.
Yeah.
And so wherever I sit, I've always felt felt myself like, oh, I'm not country enough for Americana, and I'm not really folk enough for folk, but I'm not like pop enough to be in the pop. And now my kids that are in their 20s, to them pop just means what's on the radio and Taylor Swift, and it doesn't mean Freddie Johnston,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean, whatever and I feel like these things shift so much that it's a moving target trying to figure out what box you fit in.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and I think honestly, for me, folk means Pete Seeger
Yeah.
and Arlo Guthrie and
Yeah.
and Holly Near and Ronnie Gilbert
Early Bob
and
Dylan.
yeah, and a lot of Mississippi John Hurt, and a lot of the early blues stuff. Like, to me, it all means that.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there and so I'm comfortable being affiliated and associated with that more than I am being associated with Hank Williams Sr.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense, man. That makes sense. I think we need those boxes, but we also need to tear them down. I mean, when I was a kid, and I'm probably close to your parents' age. When I was a kid, it was you were rock, you were country, you were jazz, you were blues, and that was pretty much it. And you stay in your lane. I think I love, and I bet you do too. I love artists when artists really consciously break down those boxes. And I think you were talking about how Americana changed from country there for a while. I think Wilco had a lot to do with that. They were
Yeah.
that Uncle Tupelo were sort of the darlings of Americana, or alt country was another
Right.
label. But when Tweety started doing some of that stuff that was way outside the box, where did he belong? Where did he fit? What do you label it? But I love it, man. And what you said about being not country enough to be country with the country people, not rock enough to be with the rock people. I feel you. That is exactly what I've said about my own music for years. Is that
Yeah.
people who are into more rock stuff say, yeah, your stuff's a little too country for me. But the country people are like, that ain't country.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I'm okay. One of the things that strikes me about you, you seem like, I'm just going to guess you're relatively well read. Are you a reader?
I am.
You strike me as that. And what kind? But I'll bet you weren't the best student when you were young. Is that true, or were you?
Yeah. No, I mean, I wasn't a great student. I was when I kind of wanted to be in the
Sure.
classes that I enjoyed.
You could have been. You just were. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was a terrible student in the classes that I didn't enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. But I'm sure all your teachers were thinking, man, this guy could be one of the have some of the highest grades in the class if he would just apply himself. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of that on report cards for
I'll
sure.
bet. Me too, man. And what do you? I know you said you don't like to list any particular musician as influential, and so maybe this is a similar question, but any particular books or authors come to mind that have had a big impact on you?
Um, yeah, I mean, it's funny. I I was a voracious reader when I was a kid,
Mhm.
and and as I've grown older, I'll go through periods where I read a lot, and then I'll kind of not read for a couple months. Um, right now, I generally tend towards fiction, and but lately I've been reading a lot of baseball books, and kind of music. I'm currently reading the Geddy Lee autobiography because my daughter got it for me for Christmas.
Nice.
Um, uh, oh gosh, I'm also reading a Flannery O'Connor short story collection, who I like a great deal.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I've gone through, you know, one of the things that I really enjoy is mysteries, just kind of somewhat trashy mysteries. And I never remember the names of any of those authors
Hmm.
because they're like airport books, and I kind of go through them. Um, but I think in the realm of what would be kind of more considered literature, I went through a Murakami phase. I really like John Barth a lot,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
although I haven't read it in a decade or more, so I don't know how well it stands up.
Right.
Um, I went through all the things that
Sure.
18 and 19-year-old boys. I read all the Vonnegut and all the Tom
Kerouac.
Robbins, and yeah, I didn't read all the Kerouac. I did read On the Road, and then I read Dharma Bums, and I loved Dharma Bums
Me too.
more than On the Road,
Yeah.
but I haven't gone back and reread that stuff in a while. Oh, one of my favorite all-time authors is Richard Brautigan.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. Yeah. I love his poetry too. Do you, when you do read, do you find yourself picking up little phrases and saying, "Oh, that would work really well in a song," or get a song idea when you're reading?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend not to take notes, but I definitely feel like I hold on to stuff and come back to it.
How do you, and I'm sure it varies, but how do you typically write songs? Is it a discipline thing? Is it just something when the muse strikes? Do you ever just sit down and say, "I'm going to write a song today," or how does it work for you?
Like most people, I think it's all over the map. I mean, sometimes I do just sit down and decide that I want to write a song about something or about a thing, but generally it's a discipline thing that I just write every day. And I'm in two song groups, for one of them for over 20 years, and one that I run for like the last 15 years. Um,
Nice.
and so I have two songs a week that are due, like
Wow,
homework.
that's
And so
great.
that's where most of the stuff from my last 4 or 5 records has come from.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Do you ever one of the things I've done, I've been kind of prolific lately and I don't know why, but man, I'll write it out. But I'm doing a lot of, I guess, dreaming, not dreaming complete songs, but waking up in the morning with an idea, a really solid idea, or even lines for a song or a melody. Do you ever do
Oh
that?
wow. It's happened a couple times over the years, not a lot. I have a tendency to not remember my dreams very well, or I'll go for like 3 or 4 days in a row where I'll remember them, and then I'll go for 6 months where I won't remember a single dream.
Yeah.
So I've had it. I mean, I've had it happen where whole songs have come out of a dream. Um, I feel like I tend to get more from while I'm exercising, like while I'm
Uh-huh.
run. I'm an on and off runner, and I swim and I cycle, and I feel like I tend to get stuff from that.
Hmm. That's got to be difficult because you've either got to write it down or remember it if you're out for a run.
I've definitely heard interviews with songwriters about about the morning journaling thing and the
Yeah.
dream thing, and there's this sense of like you've got to capture this thing, right? And so um, I think Dan Wilson talk a lot about like having something next to your bed, and you wake up and you got to write it right down. And I'm kind of contrary about that sort of thing. I mean, I've definitely had things that I've thought and then they go away, and you go, "Oh, well."
Yeah.
Um, but I tend to like the idea of either letting something kind of float away a little bit and see if it'll come back, or playing kind of a self game of telephone with it,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
and so in that way, it's not to say that I have voice memos and I sometimes will, open it up on the phone and sing something into it.
Sure.
The number of times that I've actually gone back to those and done anything with them is zero. So over time, if I'm running and something gets into my head, the last record I put out, I had a song that I wrote while running, and it was it was a couple of lines. It really was just a verse. But while I was running, I really decided I wanted to remember it. And so I just started singing it over and over in my head. And so by the time I got home from the run, it was pretty cemented in there. And I've done the same thing in the car. There was a song years ago called Suitcase. I wrote the whole thing while I was driving, and I couldn't really record it. And I was in California, and I couldn't, whatever. There was no way to write it down.
Hmm.
And so I wrote the entire thing. I would sing the first verse over like 20 times over and over, and then I would move on to writing the second verse in my head, and then I would sing that over and over and over and over.
Nice, nice. Have you heard the Mitch Hedberg line about what we've been talking about when he said, I'm a comedian. I write jokes for a living. So if I'm laying in bed and feeling lazy and I think of a joke, I've got to convince myself that it's not funny, so I don't have to get up and write it down. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned Scrappy, and I know you've played with a lot of other Austin musicians. Who's someone that you have not played with or collaborated with that you would love to get a phone call today from someone saying, "Hey, do you want to open up for me, or do you want to play a gig with me, or write a song with me?" Somebody that who you admire that you've not collaborated with.
um, Gosh, I mean, there's so many probably, but the one that comes to mind is there's a local musician here in Austin named who goes by the name Bayonne. Um, he used to play years ago as Roger Sellers,
Hmm.
and he kind of did the folk. It wasn't folk, but he kind of did acoustic guitar thing, and he's very good. But he moved over into the world of kind of electronic music,
Mm.
and so I don't know the terminology for what he does, but he's got like the computer setup and the keyboards
Hmm.
and I think he travels with a live drummer maybe at this point.
Mm.
But he seems to play a bunch of different instruments, and he builds stuff. I don't think he's building loops live, but he has tracks and he's playing a lot of instruments live, and um, it's just really mesmerizing, interesting
Hmm.
stuff, and some of my favorite records. His first full length record was called Primitives, and it's one of my favorite records. So I'd love to work with him someday.
I think you should reach out to him, man.
Yeah.
Well, you have a ton of how many? I mean, it's hard to count, right, at this point because I know you put out a bunch of 45s. How many full length records do you have? Is it 12, something like that?
I think so. I think the one that's about to come out is 11 or 12 or
Uh-huh.
10, or I don't know. There's some live records in there too. So
Right.
uh, I think this might be the 12th full length and maybe the 10th studio is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you for putting stuff out on vinyl.
Yeah.
I really enjoy vinyl a lot. Always have, and I appreciate the convenience of iTunes and the streaming stuff. But I'm sure I don't think it's for me. I don't think it's a nostalgia thing or audiophile. I just like being forced to slow down
Yeah.
and consume in a more deliberate manner. But where do you? Let me ask you what if you have any thoughts on that. Where is this going? I mean, I know we're putting out a lot more singles now because it's so easy to do. You record a single and stream it. Uh, where's all this going? What's the future of how people are going to consume, or more importantly, how are we going to make music and put it out? Have you thought about that?
I mean, it's a big question. I mean, I think, I think in terms of us independent musicians, it's kind of an individual thing. Like you have to figure out, if you are making a living or making money playing music, you have to figure out what the people that like you want,
Hmm.
and try to do that. On this last record, or the record that's about to come out, I was ready to just not release anything because, in terms of a physical thing,
Mm,
uh, because vinyl. I love vinyl too. I love putting on records. It's incredibly expensive to
it
make.
is.
It already was, and now it's gotten worse since
Yeah.
the pandemic. Um, the turnaround time on my last one was almost 2 years, and
Oh,
it was a terrible experience. Like working with the people was rough. The whole thing, I never wanted to do it again. Um, and then CDs, which again, like I still play and I still have, uh, a love for. And because a lot of my fan base is older, there are people that buy CDs, but not a ton.
right.
And so I kind of put it out to my Patreon folks and said, look, what do you guys, how do you want to consume this? Because it's going to stream, but do you also want,
Mhm.
a CD or a vinyl or a tape cassette? But I had actually kind of come up with this idea that because I had done enough kind of standing at the merch table last year, and I've had people come up and they go, look, I really want to support you. I have a new car, it doesn't have a CD player. I have a new laptop, it doesn't have a CD player. Um, but I'm going to hand you this $15 and you're going to hand me that CD
Yeah.
and we'll be done with it.
Yep.
And that's fine, except it's not because it's garbage. Like I'm creating this garbage for somebody else to take and put in the garbage. And really, it's an excuse so that we can exchange this money so they can support what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so I had this idea because I sit in my office here, my studio space, and and I have stuff. We all have stuff. We have knickknacks, right? It's like I have this old little Star Wars guy. It's one of these. I think he's from Hoth. I've got that, and I've got a Tim Lincecum signed baseball.
Nice.
Maybe worth a little more. I might not get rid of that, but the idea was like, I have this whole junk drawer full of things from my childhood. Like, oh, right here I have a this is the seventh annual Lucasfilm Fourth of July picnic. I came in third place. It's a little messed up right now. It's 1984. I came in third place in the obstacle course. So if I had a little box when I went on the road of like stuff like this, and people came up afterwards and they're like, "Look, I'm going to stream your record on Spotify," and I'll go, "Cool. Do you want this for $15? Do you
Nice.
want this for because
Yeah.
these are like these weird little tchotchkes I have that
Yeah.
are they're nice and all, but a couple 5 or 6 years ago, my mom passed away, and my brother and sister and I went and we were cleaning out her office, and you realize that you know we die, and then all this stuff that we saved, our kids are going to go through it, and they don't want it. My
Right.
kids don't want this crap,
Yep.
so like I should be getting rid of this now, and why not, have this meaningful little thing, whatever it is that is already going to be trash, but it at least there's some meaning attached to it instead of like I'm just paying some company in New Jersey to make me another compact disc that somebody's going to throw away.
I love this, man.
Now, I say that I put this for a vote to my Patreon and a bunch of people were still like we want vinyl, we want CDs. So the future of music is I think it is individual in that I'm still going to take that little box on the road, and maybe some people will take me up on it.
Yeah.
But for the time being, some people still are going to buy that CD, and some people are still going to buy that record.
Right.
Um, the the greater, the more general music business industry scene is going to just be streaming. The
Yeah.
labels will still come up with different ways that they can bleed money out of people for the same things and bleed money out of artists because the entire industry and business is corrupt and criminal, and so
Sure.
they will continue to figure out different ways. In another cassette tapes are already coming back. In another 5 years, CDs will make a rebirth because they'll want to try
Yeah.
to convince people to buy a thing,
Yeah.
and there'll be nostalgia attached, and it will happen. I guarantee it.
Yep.
Same way it happened with vinyl, but it won't have a huge effect on people like me. I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, I know the one of my favorite bands is the Felice Brothers. Do you know the Felice
Mhm.
Brothers?
Yeah.
They put out a new record recently. Didn't announce it much. kind of a surprise release, put it out on Bandcamp only, and you
Yeah.
can't stream it. You have to pay for it to
Yeah.
listen to it. That's an interesting idea, you know, especially if you have a good fan base. You don't have to put everything out that way, but that's I think an interesting way to put things out. But it'll be fun to see how things go, and you know, there's so many great things about it. Like I said, I don't want to be the old guy who complains about the convenience of being able to listen to any song I want to in a heartbeat. I mean, that's great, but it's also
Yeah.
it's kind of weird. Well, this new record coming out, "The Ocean Knocked Me Down," it will anyone who's listening to this video, it's coming out literally pretty much the day this is released. So, anything you want to say about that record?
There it is. Look at
Yes.
that. Ooh, it's shiny. Compact disc.
Yeah, speaking of discs, yeah. The Ocean Knocked Me Down. Uh, anything in particular you wanna say about it?
Um, it's just it's a record, and it's
Yes, it
got
is.
it's got a bunch of songs. It's got 16 songs on it.
Okay,
Um, and it's a lot of the songs that I wrote during the pandemic.
okay.
Um, in fact, I think all of them were written kind of 2020 and later. Um, and yeah, I think I had a really good time making it. I made it with Mark Addison, who I've made several previous records with here in Austin. And the way that we kind of work together is to just play all the instruments that we can ourselves. So we tend to approach every song as I will go in and just play the song on a guitar or on a ukulele or on a banjo. And then we start kind of layering things on, and
Mhm.
Mark will go, "Hey, do you want to play the drums or I'll play the drums?" And so we keep doing that until we run into a wall where we either don't like our own performances or feel we can't do something the way we want it done, and then we call in somebody and bring in. So there's a few guests, there's here and there, but it's primarily Mark and I play all the instruments.
Mhm. Any common themes? I mean, you said it was a lot of pandemic, stuff. If someone analyzed it, do you think they would say, "Oh, there's a theme of blank"?
um, I don't know. My last record came out. Well, it came out in 21. It was supposed to come out in 20, but I recorded it in 2019, and a lot of the songs dealt with death. My mother had passed away, and I think there was that cycle of a death in the family, and then also that makes you kind of reflect on your own
Yeah,
age and your own mortality, and so it was very thematic. That record was very thematic.
yeah.
Most of my other records, I tend not to go in thinking a theme,
Mhm.
and it's more kind of uh, in retrospect. I can look back later and go, oh yeah. I mean, I think a lot of a lot of my records, maybe from here on out, are just about aging, and
Sure.
just about
Yeah.
uh, there's definitely three or four songs that deal with kind of the physical aging uh, that seems to be happening every day in my body and keeping me from skateboarding and doing the things that I want to do.
How old are
Uh,
you?
I'm 51 and I'm still skateboarding, uh,
That's good. That's good.
which my body might decide tomorrow to not let me anymore.
You do seem
But
you seem pretty fit, especially for
uh,
51.
yeah, I think the thing about aging, as I'm sure you're aware of, is it's not the I think I always pictured it as like, oh, something goes wrong. Like if you think about old age and you think about, oh, you break your hip,
Yeah.
right? And then you're in bed. And
Yeah.
so I always imagined these things with aging as being like a one thing to the next.
Mhm.
Very quickly it happens and then you're laid up, as opposed to this weird like, oh, there's just aches and pains, and it
Yes.
doesn't matter how much stretching you
Yes.
do
Yes.
or how much of the right, vitamins you take.
Yeah.
You just have that. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
And so it's more, for me, the aging and pain thing is more just coming to terms with it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes say, I'll be 68 this year, and I sometimes say, no one told me when I was young that, for example, my feet would hurt all the time.
Yeah.
My knees hurt my back hurts all the time, and not bad,
Right.
not to lay me out. It's just, aches and
Yeah.
pains. When you were a kid, you would be thinking, "What's wrong?" It's just life now.
Well, here's the thing is I think somebody told all of us and we just weren't listening
That's probably
because
true. That's probably true. Yeah.
having children in their 20s now, it's like I'm sure I say this in front of them and they are absolutely not listening to a word I
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I last year I was my dad and I went to some spring training games in Arizona, and we were sharing a hotel room together, and I have like a stretching regimen I have to do every morning. I do it every morning. I do it most every night. And it's not a thing that makes me feel great. It's a thing that keeps me
Yes.
at maybe, not being laid up.
Right.
And so I was doing my stretching in the morning, and my dad's, he's probably 70, I think he's 75 this year. And he goes, what are you doing stretches for? And I said, oh, just my back, a lot of back pain and stuff. And he goes, oh yeah, I guess I kind of remember when I was your age, there being like a lot of back pain. And I said, oh, and I was like, pleasantly surprised. I said,
Mhm.
oh,
Mhm.
so like it goes away? And he goes, oh no, no, you just kind
You
of get
just
used
live
to
with it.
it.
Yeah. That's great. Matt, I have so many other questions, but I've already taken up more of your time than I said I would. So I don't know, maybe down the road we'll have round two of this at some point. But let me wrap up by asking you kind of a profound question. You mentioned death, and I know you lost your mom. I've lost both of my parents, and as we are aging, it's sort of an inevitable question. Do you have any particular guiding philosophy or spiritual leanings or thoughts about death and how you deal with not only death but just with the shit we have to deal with in life? Is it music
um,
is it music for you, or do you have other things that you lean on?
music and exercise. I say exercise. That always makes it sound so boring and or prescribed in some way.
Hmm.
Um, I think I just like I've always liked being active and engaging in activities.
Hmm.
And so I love skateboarding. I play on a baseball team. My wife is a huge backpacker, and we're both runners, although we're both kind of sidelined with injury right now.
Hmm.
But I think, yeah, for me, being able to play music, being able to being able to move, which I'm really grateful for, and I realize at some point could go away or at any point. But and also just I think feeling like you're of service. Those are things that I think for some people that is a religious thing. Kind of feeling being of service is a tenet of a lot of religions, and I'm not. I'm sure like a lot of people in this industry, I'm not specifically intertwined in one religion or another. Um, but I definitely, for me, I have an understanding that I don't really know. I don't really know what's going on out there, and I try to, on the one hand, I try to remain in a state of wonder for as long as I can, and I feel like that comes and goes. My wife and I were just talking about that over this vacation because I feel like sometimes you get wrapped up in your own things, and it's harder to appreciate that. And we were out in California for the holidays and for a couple weeks, and we were on the Monterey Peninsula, which is a beautiful,
Beautiful.
beautiful place. And it's where one of the places I grew up and where I went to high school, where I met my wife. And we went down to the ocean every morning and jumped in the ocean and swam. And it's in a little spot in Pacific Grove, California, where in the last year there have been three great white attacks. And we didn't go very far out. We were definitely, mindful of sharks, and but I think just embracing things like that as you can every day. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's great, man. Hey, thank you so much for doing this. I really
yeah,
appreciate it, and look forward to that new record. And I hope you and I cross paths in person sometime. I'm not far from
Absolutely.
Boston. I'd love to. I've never seen you. I'd love to come see you. I'll do that sometimes, and when I do, I will say hi.
Very cool. Thank you, John.
Thanks so much for doing this, man. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye bye.